Well, good afternoon. Today is the 24th of February 2017. It's been a couple of weeks since I've posted chronicling my Army career. Had started a video on Iraq and it just, became a little bit too much. And I had to stop and figured I would do it a little bit different way. Um, so what I want to do with Iraq is I'm going to split it up in a couple of different videos, two, maybe three at the most. Talk about different aspects of my time in Iraq, the overall conflict, so on and so forth. So we'll see how that goes. Operation Iraqi Freedom started, of course, I believe it was March 20th something of 2003. In response to just a global threat, if you will, of terrorism against the United States after 9/11. Whenever I went to Iraq, I got into country the 4th of November 2007, and we were in the surge campaign. There ended up being 7 different campaigns, and the surge, I believe, was the 4th or 5th one, I believe it was. And the purpose of the surge was basically it was an increase over basically a 15, 18-month time period, maybe even 2-year time period of 30,000 additional forces into Iraq. And it was basically all hands on deck. We are going to snuff out the insurgent fighters, the terrorists, and we're going to eradicate that threat. And I understand from a political standpoint, especially those in the press, have always wanted to downplay it, but the surge worked. Okay, by and large, I mean it worked, and it worked very effectively. Whenever we got over there, it was the very end of the surge as far as much of the initial push. Now it continued until basically, I think around the time period we left, because so we were there. We got 2 campaign stars because then Operation Iraqi Sovereignty started right after the surge, and it started while we were still in the country. But the initial push for the surge was pretty much over whenever we first got there. It was still the securing and the new cornerstones for the national Iraqi government were still being put in place. But most of the heavy fighting was over by the time we got there. But we would still be privy to it and listen to it. We were still getting hit, indirect fire. There was many mornings, Simmons and I would listen to firefights early in the morning, around 8 o'clock, 8:15. We'd get off work and working on the EOC office, and we just listen to it, go back and forth and everything, and that was very, very surreal to listen to it rage back and forth, because these idiots they would attack the gate and everything, and the gate was about a mile and a quarter from us. We were not in any direct danger or anything, but you could hear it just like it was go right down the street, the firefight, and so it was very, very kind of surreal to listen to it. The most significant thing, especially early on in Iraq, that happened was we lost a soldier, Sergeant First Class John J. Tobiason from Minnesota. I knew him vaguely. In the EOC, we would do weapons check and sensitive items checks via phone call with the different elements of the command structure that we had that was placed in different areas, either through Iraq or they're on the VBC. And Sergeant Tobias and his team, they were at the Stryker Stables. And So we would call probably around 10 o'clock at night, and then 6 in the morning maybe, and pretty much talk to either him or one of the other gentlemen every night. Didn't know him or anything. And I did meet him the day before he was tragically taken. He came into our office and to get coffee, and we didn't know who he was. It's really kind of a funny story with that, but I'll go into that later. And but anyway, he was tragically killed. It was a freak thing at a USO show, and and it just kind of puts it, puts it all into real, real, this, it's a reality. So, but anyway, we, the largest thing I did as far as a job, was mobile postal missions, MPM missions. Simmons, me, Harlan Hayes, and Eugene Mueller was primarily the team that I was on. There was a couple of different teams and everything, but that I was on, or it was kind of a split up thing. Mueller and I and two other people or whatever. But for the 80% of the missions, it was us four, and so we'd go out in the different parts of the Baghdad area to these outlying fobs and set up little mobile post offices and, attend to the soldiers and their postal needs and so on and so forth. Now, we would not take the mail with us. They were, because the main thing is when these outlying fobs, they only had maybe a couple of hundred people, the location they were at. So whenever they'd come to a main hub for mail, to mail something off, they'd have to stand in line like everybody else. So if we could go out and assist them where they were at, whenever they would convoy to the main hubs, they could just drop their mail off, then they can go relax. Okay, so it was a very good way to service them and give back to them. And I really enjoyed it because I always wanted to be into combat arms, and I wasn't. So this was a way for me to kind of get that taste of what they do every day, through the convoys and the Black Hawk flights. And it was a lot of fun. It really was. I mean, it gave you a really, really good appreciation and a different perspective about what it really entails to go to war. Because on a day-to-day basis at Camp Liberty, I mean, it literally was like a 9-to-5 job, and you got off work and you went back to your room and you played, PlayStation or Xbox, or, goofed off on the computer, or you slept, or whatever the case might be. And these guys, they had some creature comforts and everything. They'd have a little center where they could play their Xbox or whatever, but they were, I mean, it was much more primitive. And so it gave us a very, very good, really appreciation of what they did. What quote unquote real war is. And not saying, I mean, we got attacked on Liberty, of course. I mean, indirect fire and rockets and mortars. Some people got hit, people got killed. I mean, war is war. Okay, so it's this just because we were at Camp Liberty or whatever, doesn't people think we were not at war. We were, okay? It's just we were not directly on the front lines in the context of our centralized location of wearing body armor 24/7 whenever we were outside of our facility. A lot of these guys, as soon as they, left their hooch or their room or whatever, a lot of these guys were literally out there in the middle of nowhere, so they were 24/7 wearing their body armor, pretty much. And we necessarily didn't have to do that. But one of the things that I'll mention in this video here, because of the surge and because of some of the policies that were coming down from the Pentagon, they wanted every hand on deck. So, and what that really meant was whenever you had say like contracting work or whatever the case. But of course, you had contractors, KBR, Halliburton, and Blackwater, and many other different contract companies were there. And but as far as like the building of structures and so on and so forth, what they would do is they, instead of using American soldiers or other coalition soldiers, they would bring these TCNs, third country nationals, and they would be the ones responsible for building a structure, cleaning up something, whatever the case might be. Well, a negative result of that, and we knew just from and parts of my job as being, especially with a postal inspector at one point in time, you get to meet so many different people when you're in that kind of a role, the inspecting role. Because I was working at the JMMT, which is Joint Military Mail Military Terminal, and so you meet so many different people. You meet the intelligence people and so on and so forth, or the MPs, and you have conversations with them. And this is kind of how this information gets disseminated. But we understood with the TCNs that whenever we would bring them in, some of them actually ended up being either one, they were closet Al-Qaeda members or Taliban or any other sectarian terrorist or whatever. We knew that, and or they were people who were selling information for maybe the Taliban or the Al-Qaeda had gotten a hold of, Ahmed's family and was going to kill him, and unless you gave information. So as these TCNs were coming in through the gate to be vetted, by our service members, it was kind of a loose vetting system. There was no way of knowing of who actually was a terrorist or not. They only brought in maybe a couple of hundred a day. They didn't have any weapons or anything, but what they would do is they would either, regardless of either camp they might have been in, either a terrorist or giving information to a terrorist, they would basically just kind of keep a mental picture of where they were at. May or may not have had a cell phone to put coordinates in, but anytime we had large facilities being constructed there on the VBC, within a couple of days there was attacks in those centralized locations. So, and we figured this out by killing enough of the insurgents and getting their intel off their body, and where they stayed and camped, that we understood that this was kind of a negative result of the all hands on deck policy for service members. And I'm sure that a lot of that changed. I mean, I only did a couple of details. I did some details where we regarded some TCNs, and some of them were very, very educated. They were more of like the foremans of the crews. Most of the TCNs were poor Iraqi citizens who, and I forget how much money we gave them a day. It was, I don't know, 30, 40 dinar or something. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, they were being compensated, and unfortunately, some of that money that we were giving them were going into the hands of terrorists. But that's one of the unfortunate things that kind of takes place in that environment. But overall, from a military standpoint, in rooting out the terrorists and so on and so forth, and taking back cities and taking back sections of the country, that the surge was a wonderful success. We got there, like I said, on the 4th of November, 2007. The next day, we got attacked. 5 indirect fire rockets and mortars. I really kind of thought it was funny at first, but I didn't really fully appreciate the gravity of the situation. As time went on, you become more aware of yourself at war. I personally was okay with and it's going to sound very, very strange, but I was okay with the thought of dying in Iraq. It didn't bother me. It didn't keep me up at night. It would be what it was. And I remember watching, and I'm sure many others who might see or hear this will who have seen Band of Brothers will remember there was an episode in Band of Brothers where there was an exchange between a private and an officer, and he was talking about, it was important for soldiers to already just accept the fact they were already dead, and that took the fear away in the psychological aspect of it. Whenever you adopt that kind of thinking, it takes the fear away of, am I going to die? So you can focus, you can think about what's going on, and so on and so forth. Because whenever it doesn't matter if it's direct fire or indirect fire, whenever the best way I've ever heard it being described, which is very, very true, regardless if it's direct or indirect, is whenever it first starts to happen, you literally sometimes you freeze, but a lot of it is, you kind of expect something to happen, but you never know when it's going to happen. So whenever it does, it's like your brain turns to water and it starts to run out both ears. And then you start looking at your battle buddies, which is a term from the Army, but you look at your buddies that's to your right and your left, and you start to kind of gel with them, and they start to gel with you. And all of this is taking place very, very fast over maybe a 10-second time period, maybe less than 10 seconds. And so you start to really kind of clue in what exactly is taking place, and then you act. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, that 2 or 3 seconds to 10 seconds, whatever it is that many seconds too long. But with indirect fire, and this is one of the scary things about indirect fire, and it is it's so random. You never know when it's going to come right at you. You can feel it. Sometimes you can see the impact. Sometimes you can see the smoke, of course, but you feel the concussion. And even whenever an indirect fire comes in, even if it's even a half a mile away, it can have such reverberations through your body that you shake. You can kind of feel it in your bones and your teeth. And we would also have controlled deaths where we would find like a cache of weapons and we'd blow them up. Well, that was all base level, ground level blowing up. Well, which gives a vibration within itself. But when it was indirect fire, you have all that kinetic energy and so on and so forth. So whenever it's fired from some other place and it hits the ground, it's more of a reverberation through the ground, like an earthquake, if you will. Where the controlled debt, you get that across the ground, but it protrudes out. But anyway, so you get attacked and everything, and it's very surreal. It is. But one of the weird, funny things about Iraq and getting attacked in a combat situation is you become kind of numb to it, and it doesn't have the same effect on you the longer into the deployment. So you get into this complacency, where at first you're very, very hyper vigilant, and then you become complacent, and then because of that, at some point the psychological effects and the wear and tear and so on and so forth, it's just a cycle. Then you become kind of more hyper vigilant, but you have your issues where you become angry or confused or whatever the case might be, and it does play on your emotions. And I think this also is something that's maybe it's a little bit different for those of us who are not combat arms MOS related, and also the majority of our time was on Camp Liberty or Victory or anything there at the BIAP. Those guys who were out there on the front lines, if you will, at those FOBs where you go service, from my experience talking to them, especially after coming back from Iraq, they went through a lot of the same thing, but they lived it a little bit more intimately than what we did. So their reaction to it is different than what ours is, but very, very similar. But anyway, so I just kind of adopted this whole, I'm not going to come back. It's a one-way ticket. And I was okay with that. As a born-again Christian, I knew exactly I was going to go to heaven, when and if, I left this earth. So I didn't struggle with that. It wasn't something that kept me up at night. You do hope and you pray when you go on a mission that everything's going to be okay, and you don't have to fire, and you don't have to dodge that bullet, and so on and so forth. So or save the life. I was a combat lifesaver, and I think the biggest things that worried me the most was, on a selfish point of view, and again, I was okay with the thought of dying. That didn't bother me, but I didn't think I was internally strong enough that where if something happened and I got attacked and I ended up having to lose an arm or a leg, if I could live the rest of my life with an amputee part of my body. And I've seen so many veterans just exhibit such courage and grace and everything since my time in the military and being deployed, that has lost a limb and everything, and they've carried on with their life with just extreme courage and everything. But the other thing was, I was a combat lifesaver, and I really didn't want to get in a situation where we were in a convoy, we got hit, and I froze trying to save somebody's life. That really kept me up at night, was that fear. But like with anything else, once you get into that, and thank God it never happened, but once you get into a combat-related situation, your training does kick in, regardless how great or small. And you're going to have your buddies, they're right there with you, and they're going to help you, you're going to help them. But anyway, so I'll stop here. I'll post another video here shortly about more of the individual stories, especially with the postal missions and everything. But until then, this is Caleb signing off the net.